What if I told you that a 6-year-old child, bright, full of life, was murdered, not by a stranger, by but by his own mother? And what if I told you she claimed it was to cast out demons? We have a deeply tragic and disturbing case with significant emotional impact. Authorities are still trying to piece it together, but the full circumstances that it caused all this was because of zealous religion and mental health.
Two brothers,
We have it.
sons of a Navy SEAL. Jerome Hill, a former Baltimore PD officer and narcotics detective. Victor Hill, the former sheriff of Clayton County and author of Vigilante Sheriff. Now, they've joined forces to break down the hottest topics in law enforcement and beyond on the Hill of Justice.
So, where we're at right now, brother, is that we have his mother, Rhonda Polanese, and we're going to show the body cam footage. And if you want to pause at any point in time, let's pause and talk about her behavior. But it is very telling that something was clearly amiss.
Hey, you Rhonda? You Rhonda?
Yeah.
Hey, Rhonda, I'm actually here to talk to you.
Rhonda Polanese, in a hoodie and dark sunglasses, stands outside her Fort Pierce home, telling deputies her son is inside. But 6-year-old Ramil Pierre hadn't been to school in weeks.
They haven't been to school in this whole month?
Oh, yeah. No. It's just that, I haven't sent him to school yet.
Minutes later, the St. Lucie County Sheriff's deputy is heard asking to see the boy.
Is your kid here right now?
Is my son here?
Yeah, is he here?
Yes.
Is there any way I could at least see him just to make sure that he's okay?
Sure.
Deputies follow her inside and find Ramil wrapped in a blanket lying still in his bedroom. He was already gone. According to investigators, he'd been dead for days. We're now learning Polanese told detectives she believed Ramil was possessed and claims God told her to suffocate him. She described putting her hand over his mouth while he kicked and screamed. She then moved his body to another bed and checked on him daily, waiting, she said, for a sign.
Well, let me tell you this, brother. Mental health is a serious problem, especially for sheriffs. Let me tell you what's going on. There's not a lot of facilities for mental health patients. Best example I could give you is we had a woman in Clayton County that kept walking in front of cars, and my deputies was able to stop her before someone actually killed her. They worked for 2 or 3 hours to try and get a hospital to accept her, and no one would. So what do? We can't just let her go back out there, or at least I wasn't gonna let that happen. So I had to tell them to put a criminal charge on her about impeding traffic so we could put her in jail where we could get her mental health treatment in my medical ward. So I actually had to charge her with a crime just so I could have a reason to have her in jail. Jails have become the mental health centers of this country now.
Yes, it has. And
Right.
you're right.
And it's not supposed to be, but sometimes I was put in situations where I had to run a mental health center. I had to find reasons to put a charge on someone, which I don't like doing that because we know I'm in the fight against lawfare, but it wasn't lawfare, it was to save their lives and other people's lives. We've got to develop, I don't want to call them jails, but they have to be secure facilities. There are some people that, just like you have to lock up a serial killer or a child molester because they're a danger to society. They're locked up to protect other people and sometimes protect them from themselves. We have to go back to having those type of facilities where people who are a danger to themselves and others are kept away. Not necessarily in a cell, but in a secure environment they can't get out. Basically, when you commit people now, they usually back out in 24 to 48 hours. I'm not sure what you can do in 24 to 48 hours to say, okay, this person is safe and they're no longer a danger to themselves or others. I'm not sure. But usually I've had to take people to the hospital. And one was a good friend of mine. He was like an uncle. He's passed away now. but he flipped out, and we took him. In 48 hours, he was out later. I don't know what the determination was. I don't know how they figured, okay, he's good now to come back out. Maybe he was. I don't know, but whether he was or not, he would have been out in 48 hours.
Mm.
And
You know, yeah.
yeah, and there has to be a way of assessing, not harassing, not making up charges on someone just to see them in that predicament. But there needs to be some type where, hey, this person, I'm sure she's shown indications of mental health. This is not the first time. If you look at that house,
No
you
way.
notice that the house is boarded, which is very, very odd. I know somebody had to realize, hey, something is not right there. And, we're in a society now where being proactive is frowned against. If you do something preemptive to prevent something from happening, you got this crowd out here, oh, you shouldn't have done that, or you're violating their rights. But that's the only way to stop people from getting killed or hurt. You have to take some type of preemptive. Kind of like when we talk about active shooters, they're mentally ill anyway. Anybody that goes and
Yeah.
kill a bunch
If
of
you're doing
people are,
that.
but they
Right.
usually give clues. They get on social
No.
media and write manifestos.
Mm.
They send letters to people. And if
Mm.
people would be more aggressive and proactive and say, "Hey, I think there's a problem here. He's talking about killing people," and then law enforcement take proactive measures. Hey, do you have guns? Can we look around? Can we see what's going on? We can prevent a whole lot of carnage in the future. This was preventable,
I
and
I agree with you. Yeah.
exactly, exactly.
And here we got someone. First of all, it's Fort Pierce, Florida. If anybody knows about South Florida, particularly Fort Pierce around this time, it's hot as sin. And she's coming in there with a hoodie. Okay, sunglasses aside, she's coming in there a hoodie. I mean, dead giveaway right there. So she asserts that her 6-year-old son, as you heard, was possessed and believed that God told her to suffocate him. Obviously, that's delusional, of course, and it fits a religious theme psychosis, schizophrenia spectrum, and
Yes,
I know this all too well, or severe mood disorders. And then you have this grandiose delusions, and it's safe to say this is just one of the classic symptoms of schizophrenia and or schizophrenia active disorder. And as you know, it's the belief that God is speaking to you directly. And here we have investigators that described her grief as not only not sincerely distraught, but they understood that there was some type of severe depression. And then you follow that up with she was freeing her son, later checked on his decomposing body. So this is stuff you didn't hear. Decomposing body, blowing warm air in his face. You know, this is just bizarre ritualistic, behavior, despite clear evidence, and she saw this, that he was gone, you know. But this shows you the disorganized thinking and the poor reality that they have. And and he was gone for 2 weeks already at that point. Hot summer sun. Look, when the cops went in there, they knew immediately what the
absolutely.
deal was, you know? So we've had over a period of time these exorcist related killings. And what a lot of people don't know, they're more common than what people think they are. So you have people grouping all this Christianity, spiritual warfare ideologies, and these untreated psychosis and cult like isolations that is going on. And I need to be very clear with folks. Faith can heal, but unchecked religious fanaticism, especially when fueled by isolation, delusion, or untreated mental health, can kill people. And here are the cases that I looked up. You know this all too well. Let's go to Guyana, Jonestown, 1978. Jim Jones. Does that ring a bell?
It does.
Mass murder suicide. 909 people dead. 276 of them were children
Hmm.
killed. You remember in
Hmm.
Texas, 1993, the Branch Davidians. 4 ATF agents were killed as a result of this murder suicide. And David Koresh, 76 lives killed because of that. New York, 2014, 2 brothers were beaten during an exorcism in a church. One of them died.
Mhm.
Texas, 2017, a mother drowned her kids in the bathtub, calling it a cleansing ritual. Indiana, 2021, a woman killed her daughter, believing that she was possessed. Killed your own daughter that she was possessed. California, 2022, and this is one of the more recent ones, and I think that everybody pretty much can remember this. A father stabbed his two young kids with a spear gun, claiming that they had serpent DNA. I don't know if you remember. He followed QAnon. That religious nut followed that group and all those conspiracies. And as you see, it's ravaged the whole political spectrum that people actually believe the nonsense that's going on with this. These aren't one-offs. It's part of a pattern where these fringe religious nuts, untreated mental health, and conspiracy thinking blended to this deadly conviction of, you know, we can hide under a religious umbrella saying, hey, guess what? I believe these voices are what's telling me to do this. I mean, what do you think?
Well, you know me. I'm a leadership connoisseur, and I always believe everything, regardless of what it is, rises and falls on leadership. If you look at all of these situations that you just talked about, all of these deaths occurred because of poor leadership or lack of leadership, and some of it is lack of initiative, lack of courage, and then some of it, and let's talk about the lack of courage. So much is the pure fear because if we actually do something, oh my God, what'll happen? Someone may sue
Good point.
us. The media may do something, but there's a lot of this stuff. I mean, Koresh is a whole nother story, but that was a situation where if they'd waited, he would have went into town and they could have arrested him.
Hmm.
Instead of trying to break into place and cause a whole shootout and a standoff that lasted over 30 days. There's a much easier way to
You
get
had
him, you know what I'm
more
saying?
time. Yeah, yeah. Time was
Absolutely.
on your side that you could have handled that without trying to go in and go into the Koresh situation. Maybe we'll talk about that later, but you're right about that.
And absolutely. In a lot of these situations, people are afraid to get involved. They're afraid to say anything or do anything. And it's put us in a very dangerous place in society because people are afraid to be a good Samaritan because no good deed goes unpunished with the type of bureaucracy, the type of prosecutors and the politics and the media that we got out here today. But if you look at all of these situations, if the law enforcement leadership would have been more aggressive. Hey, if there's mentally ill people, we need to know about it. We need to monitor it. We need to make sure that we go and see what they're doing and why they're doing it. And but I think everyone gets a little bit kind of scary. Hey, look, because let's say if a person is acting like her, do they have weapons? That's something we need to know you know and that's something we need to check on for their safety and other people's safety when people in that state of mind suppose she has access to a firearm or something like that and people don't like what it takes to keep them safe. It's not sexy. No one likes standing in a line for an hour at an airport to get searched, but that's the only way you can get on that plane and know there's not going to be a bomb on it.
Mhm.
And a lot of people are like, well, I don't want anyone knocking on my door and asking questions and stuff. But if someone had knocked on that door and asked some questions, that child would still be alive today. So
Right.
proactive police work, preemptive stuff is frowned upon. And now it's pretty much let's wait and see what happens. And
Right.
hopefully it won't happen. And then if it happens, let's react to it. Let's cry about it. And then nobody does anything to say, okay, how can we prevent this from happening in the future? Just like in
Right.
martial arts, the highest art of fighting is not winning 100 out of 100 fights. It's preventing or avoiding 100 out of 100 fights. The highest art in crime fighting is not necessarily solving murders, but preventing them from even happening.
Yeah. Yeah. And part of these tragedies are because we're in a country where mental illness is stigmatized,
It
healthcare is
is.
inaccessible. So what does that do? Well, that turns some people to turn to spiritual solutions. Instead, they should be getting psychiatric ones. And too often that's what leads to faith weaponized or turned into a weapon, lack of mandatory mental health evaluations after domestic calls. How about that? You know, why don't we do some centralized reporting for extreme religious practice harming children? The schools, hey, guess what? They ain't seen them in weeks. I'm not saying
Yeah.
that they failed, but at the same time, could we speed that up a little bit? I know all the systems are overburdened, you know, um, but more to your point that you were saying, we're talking about law enforcement reluctant to question certain religious liberties because it's
Absolutely.
does what? The First Amendment. And
Right.
this is part of the problem because religion by itself isn't the villain here. But
No.
delusion dressed in scripture? Oh, left unchecked on top of that? That leads to rituals that bury children instead of demons. And this is the problem that we have all the time. Ramel should have never lost his life. That 6-year-old boy should still be with us. But people ignored certain steps. And we know that these were these precursors that were out there and it was missed.
Right. You could tell that she should not be walking free in that state. And she may be someone that shouldn't be walking free ever, but I'm not talking about in a jail cell. I believe that we have to have mental institutions that are ran kind of like we run cares for senior people when they can no longer care for themselves. It has to be secure. They can't just leave or get out. But I mean, it has to be living environments. I'm not saying they should be behind a cell or whatever like that. But they can't function on their own. That woman should not be living by herself, let alone be responsible for a life.
Right. And so,
And right.
go
So
ahead.
she should
Yeah.
be in some type of supervised environment where we can ensure that she's getting her medication, her care, and she's not a danger to herself or others. And
Right.
that can
Right.
be done in a safe, humane way.
So you have people claiming to see demons, maybe having a psychotic break, or sincerely expressing their fringe beliefs, if you will. We see that a lot in what we're dealing with now with some of the things that are going on with QAnon. The evangelicals are going through it right now. It's not uncommon for people to speak in tongues or divine utterances to mask their obedience through beatings, cultural misinterpretations. So these coercive religious environments, they do exist, but they're shielded in many instances by the First Amendment and the protections. And these people, these communities will often go silent because of it.
I agree. And then it gets more complicated. So we send police officers on calls, and usually we send them there when it's too late. We should send them when we first see these indications, and there should be something we could do through the court system reasonably to get these people help and get them in a place where they can't hurt others and can't hurt themselves. But we send a usually the cops get there when it's too late. Someone's already
Way too
dead
late.
or getting ready to get killed. Then these folks are we gotta be honest, they're dangerous, and especially when they get a knife or a gun in their hands, they can and they will kill or injure somebody. And then if the cops end up taking their lives, we really come down on the police. Well, they're mentally ill. What are you doing? Well, at the same time, this cop doesn't want to be paralyzed for life or killed either. He has a right to defend himself, but he's put in a very precarious situation because of the press and the prosecutors and the politics. And it's something that could be avoided if we would get more proactive, I'm sorry, and use more preemptive techniques. This everyone in that neighborhood know that this woman was mentally ill. I'm sure they all talk about, oh, you know her, you know she's awful, whatever like that. But
Mhm.
no one's saying nothing or do nothing. No, just mind her. She's crazy. No one thought to think, well, you know what? This woman probably shouldn't be caring for a child. And it wasn't no one thought to call, and so they hadn't seen a child in 2, 3 weeks. It would have been good if they would have made that call the first day. And you know what? If he was killed the first day, it wouldn't have solved that either. So
Right, right. It
let me
just wouldn't
back
have.
up from that. Maybe if someone had made a call and said, "Listen, this child mother is mentally ill, and I don't know if that's a good thing," and someone need to go in there and make an assessment and make a decision.
Mhm.
You know, saving lives is not pretty, and it doesn't make everybody happy. But someone has to take control of situations like that. Someone should have seen in her family, in
Mhm.
the neighborhood or something, that this is not the best person to be caring for a child because she can't really care for herself.
Right. And then we have the reverse. You remember Sonia Massey, the
Yes,
36-year-old woman that she
yes,
had the mental illness? So
yes.
she told and she was shot and killed, but shot in the face by the Springfield police officer who
Mm-hmm.
got who in my estimation, okay, she goes to tell him, hey, guess what, I rebuke you in the name of Jesus, after he gave her a command to take that boiling pot of water off the stove. As
Mm-hmm.
he gets scared, in that instance, I'm thinking he's, other than him being a bitch, the fact of the matter is that he probably, to me, had more mental health issues than she did, and
Well,
he kills her.
I'm glad you brought that up. You know, have we truly, when people become officers, they put them through they go through a psych exam.
Right, we all do, right.
Right, we all do. But obviously, based on the things I've seen in my 30 years in law enforcement, is not that accurate or doesn't work, because there are a lot of people that I've seen hired that have done some things that doesn't quite match mental illness. And then, of course, we had this conversation before. I knew during my career, I knew of a lot of officers with some phobias. And I'm not saying a phobia means you're mentally ill, but if it's something that interferes, like I think I told you before, there was a deputy that was afraid of dogs. He went on a call and he ran up on top of somebody's car and wouldn't come down. He didn't shoot the dog, but it's an awkward situation. We got to go rescue the deputy, or the owner does, because he has his fear of dogs. So he's good, but I mean, dogs are everywhere. So should he be out there? And then I worked with two people who were fearful of dead bodies. One couldn't even go to his mother's funeral because he was so afraid. Well, we answer calls where people are killed in car accidents, they die of natural causes. And it's interesting how he was able to maintain employment. And this dude actually became chief of police at some point. I know it sounds odd, but there were calls he couldn't go on, or we had to handle it for him because he had this phobia. And then I think I told you we had another guy, he had a phobia of snakes. And and that's how he got the nickname Snake, because allegedly the story was someone put a fake snake in a car and he pulled his gun and started shooting because he was so
Shooting,
afraid. Well,
right.
I'm not saying that's mental illness, but these are phobias. It deals with the mind. And when you're out there to protect people and you have these phobias, it may cause you to overreact. And when you overreact, then you get situations like you got with Massey where people end up dead. So this mental illness thing is something that I don't think we've truly got a grip on. I don't know if we truly know the answer for it, because, like you said, it's not just who we're sending the cops out to get, but what is the mental condition of the cop when he's put in different circumstances because of how he reacts under stress. And different people react under stress very differently.
And perhaps maybe we're talking about in our yearly updates that we have officers do eval, as a psych eval. I mean, or every 5 years or something like that, just to go ahead and weed
Every
that
five
stuff
years
out.
might be too late. It might need to be every 6 months, to be honest with you, because you're right.
Honestly,
Because you
at
got
this
to
point,
think, right. You got to think of the things that happen. You know, even as the elected sheriff, I would estimate, I didn't have to, but I did. I would estimate I saw at least 3 crime scenes a week where someone have died, because I used to get up out my bed and respond to everything. Even if it was a car fatality, I went there. So, a man gets hit by a MARTA bus, he's mangled in the tires, I was there. If it's a murder, I was there. Okay, well, different people react differently. I spent a significant amount of time in homicide, but other people see that and they feel like they got to go take a drink.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, you're
or
right.
some people, it has an effect on them. So we probably need, I think you just came up with a great idea, except the time span, that maybe just like certain agencies like the CIA take a polygraph every 6 months, maybe officers should take a psych exam every 6 months and a stress exam every 6 months to see exactly where they're at. Because a lot of these guys are overreacting. I don't know if they're actually murderers and woke up that day and said, I want to kill somebody, but I think they're overreacting based on some type of fear or mental phobia,
Mhm.
and they overreact and they start shooting. And we
Yeah.
might need to look at that, and that might be a way to stop that.
Yeah, and this is not to rail on religion 100%, because it's great to have faith. I 100% believe that.
Of
Um,
course.
but in all the areas that I've walked on this earth, okay, all the unalive bodies I've seen out there, I have seen not one of them raise up. to talk to me, to spook me, or anything like that. Um, and yet people will go ahead and take their religion and take it so far to no end, um, to justify the means of their own faith. And it just becomes so, it gets perverted in such a way that, the justification for what they're doing, it's just crazy to
But
me.
but but Jerome, I think again we're dealing with mental health issues. Let me tell you why. You know, let's deal with terrorists, for instance. We
All
know
right.
that the Muslim faith is a faith of peace, but there are people that say they're Muslims that engage in terrorist activity. Is it the faith, or is it the mental health of the person in a particular faith? And it's not just in that particular religion. We see it in Christianity. We see it in different religions where people have said, okay, just like this woman, she said God told her to do it, and we could
Hmm.
assume that she's of Christian faith. I don't know so much if it's the religion as much as a person is mentally ill and they just happen to be exposed to a particular religion and they take it because of their mental health issues. Does that make sense?
Well, that makes sense, but I would go even a step further than that. And I would go ahead and say, if you're a product of your environment, if you have been brought up in this type of environment with particularly about extremism, and
Right.
that's all you've known, you don't have to have a mental health illness. You just have to go ahead and just be a part of your clan, and you're going to do what
But
they do.
but now that's a part of mental illness because and maybe it wasn't self-inflicted, or you weren't born with it, but it's being inflicted. If
Hmm.
you Because they're being
Or
brainwashed. I mean, if you
coerced, yeah.
grew up and somebody put you in an environment where you were exposed to violence, you were taught that, hey, you're supposed to kill multiple people in the name of religion, mental illness can be inflict too.
Well,
The human mind can only take so much. Everyone has a threshold. Some are lower than others. You and I have a very high threshold. There's
right.
very little that affects us, but a lot of people don't. And if
Well,
you
let's
put them in
combat
that
that then.
environment, exactly,
Let's combat
exactly.
that. Let's use
Right.
racism. Now, are we going to say that every person who's racist is mentally ill? They may
Again,
have
we're
been
talking
brought up that way.
exactly. Again, we're talking about self-infliction. I
Right.
think you put two kids in a room that weren't taught anything, and they're just going to start playing with each other.
Hmm.
I've seen that. But if you have a parent, and I've seen this too, see a child playing with a child of another race and say, "Come here, I don't want you playing with him," then it's something that's taught.
Hmm.
I don't know if someone's actually, and I can't say this, the people aren't born racist. I don't know if most people are. Again, but you're inflicting your mental illness on your offspring or on
Right.
people under your leadership. You know what I'm
Right.
saying?
Right.
So again, I think there are mental health that people are born with, but I think people can be exposed to certain conditions and environments that can cause them to break.
Yeah. 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 How about?
Imagine she didn't kill him, but he grew up in that environment with her. He
Oh
could
yeah.
have grew up to become mentally ill, and it may not even been hereditary as much as what he was exposed to around her.
Right. 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 And on top of that, when I look at this tragic story, of course, I can't but help to feel that, this young boy taken out so soon in his life. And I want to allude a little bit to what you were talking about, that, you know, yes, we won't know this, but what he would have had to endure matriculating through his years all the way into adolescence, and then when he becomes a young adult, what he would have been exposed to being with his mother, we'll never know. But
We'll never know. It
but
wouldn't have been good, though, I can tell you
but
that.
that's my point. That's my point. That it couldn't have. It wasn't a favorable outcome. Let's put it that way. And if he was able to succeed and get above that and rise above that, we're giving him kudos 100%. And kudos
And
to the
that's
people
why
who are
we
going through
need
that.
and that's why we need more aggressive leadership and law enforcement and everything else to step in situations like that. Because he was born in a situation, and if somebody doesn't step in and intercede, then this is what happens. As a situation he should have been taken out of
Yeah.
and
And
didn't
we
even have to grow up under.
Right.
Exactly.
And we didn't even talk about how the religious fever that what she did upon him, how that overrides, medical care,
Yes.
and a whole bunch of other stuff that we can get into in another story. But, my thoughts, ending this show is, don't let Ramil's story vanish into another news cycle. Share this type of video with others so they can get this type of awareness. I don't understand why pastors and so on, religious other leaders don't have a faith and mental health, panel in the church. So they could say, no, this isn't what exorcism looks like, and we don't participate in that. This is a product of mental illness.
Right.
So that's probably some of the things that we should be doing. And so ending, I want everyone to, if they can, please comment below. Do you think that faith should ever override medical care or the law or so on and so forth? I would love to hear everyone's thoughts and opinions about that. We ask you to continue to keep on sharing, liking, and subscribing. We're growing really big. And brother, do you got anything that you want to say?
I think you've covered it. Other than, when you think about exorcism, you just gotta be careful. Like, I want to exercise that shirt off of you
Oh,
and that
okay.
that
Now
that cap, but
we're fading to black now. We'll talk to everyone later. See you later. Take care.
take care, brother.
All right.